Chapter 3, Echeloned Growth Objectives. The 7 essential areas of objectives. Rarely do mid-sized businesses have clearly defined innovation and marketing objectives, let alone all 7 areas. The following 7 areas are essential because every organization must set objectives for each of them or risk seriously limiting their growth potential. In turnaround or accelerated growth mode, you should look at each area from the standpoint of what will accelerate growth to the maximum extent without undue risk. Most of your objectives can be skewed toward an intensified focus on growth, which will have a positive impact on your results. You must have your team go through an objective clarification exercise for all of these areas. This does not need to happen in one fell swoop. It will be a process. But I usually find that at least a skeleton of most of these areas can be begun rather quickly, and a refinement and alignment can be done in time. You will want to have a monthly tracking and a quarterly recalibration of your key objectives. This alignment process will help to focus daily activity and lead to successful improvements in your growth and profitability. Ask yourself and your teams all of the many questions in the 7 areas that follow in order to fully qualify your objectives and reach your growth goals. So here they are, the 7 essential areas of objectives. 1. Marketing objectives. Market-related objectives should only be set after you have asked these 2 areas of questions first. The first area is, what is your decision on concentration, and what is your competitive advantage, and in what areas of the market can you be most successful? The second area has to do with what is your decision on your ideal market standing? There can be great dangers to having an 85% market share, just as having too small of the market share could be proof of gross ineffectiveness and lead to great vulnerability. It is better for you to have 50% of 250 than 85% of 100. Companies that are near monopoly face significant growth pressures and usually cannot effectively innovate. Choosing the most market share is not the objective. Choosing the optimal market share is your objective. You must determine what is optimal. Only then can you ask the other marketing questions like these. What is your business and what should it be? What is the result that customers buy from you? And what is the job that they want accomplished? What areas might you not be adequately serving? What businesses, products, or practices, if you weren't in them today, would you still choose to get into? Which ones would you not enter? And thus, what markets might you need to exit? And what practices might you need to abandon? What new products and services for existing markets does the customer value? And how should you prioritize your actions for preparing delivery of them? How do you prioritize potential new markets? And what are the triggers that signal that you should enter them? What are all of the potential distribution channels you could employ? What are the advantages of each? And where might you consider changing your distributive organization? What is your customer's perception of your service? And how do you compare to their alternatives? What is the optimal service standard and performance you need to aim for? And how do you best leverage this strategic choice in the marketplace? 2. Innovation and change-related objectives. What should your business be? Considering your competitive positioning, advantages, equalities, and weaknesses, as well as your resources, what should your business become? What innovation do you need to foster in the following 3 areas? Product, as in products or services. Social, your marketplace. And/or management, skills and activities needed to make products or services your approaches to managing and running your business. As discussed in Chapter 1, the challenge is to prioritize the areas in which you will most benefit by innovating. You may realize millions in savings through excellent innovations in management and cost containment, but you may uncover billions in a new market with either product or market innovations. You will need to have a constant strategic balance of your team's time and resources. 3. cultural objectives. What are the strengths and weaknesses of your culture, and what do you need it to become in order to be more competitive? What is the ideal culture for optimized retention, productivity, and employee happiness? 4. Resource objectives. What resources will you need in order to optimally perform and accomplish your mission? Think about the following 4 types of organizational resources. First, human resources. What do your jobs have to offer to attract and easily retain the kind of people you want and need? What talent is available on the job market? And what do you have to do to attract and retain the right talent? Second area is financial resources, and what does the level of investment in your business need to be in the form of bank loans, long-term debts, or equity to attract and hold the capital resources that you will need? The third area, physical resources. And the fourth area, information technology resources. What physical IT resources do you need to cover the business's anticipated needs, structure, and direction and plans? 5. Productivity objectives. What are the best yardsticks for comparing the management of the various units within your enterprise? What are the productivity opportunities that, if improved, would most accelerate the growth of your business? It is important to note that regarding your physical resources, human resources, and financial resources, if too much of any one resource is used to make one productive, then productivity is actually decreased. There must be a balance among the 3 resources of business. Productivity objectives require you to be in check as to whether you are getting all that you should be out of your human, financial, and physical resources. 6. Community and social responsibility objectives. Your business is a creature of a society and an economy. How can you as an enterprise nurture your society and economy, both of which can continue to feed you or put you out of business overnight? You have an obligation to set and accomplish your social responsibility objectives, not just out of your obligation to society, but out of your obligation to the enterprise as well, which depends on society for its existence. Consider that your business is part of a greater body, and then ask, what can we do for the body, the environment, physical or otherwise, an industry, a community, a city, a region, a nation, and so on, to help ensure the health of that body? 7. Profit requirement objectives. How much profitability do we require? Your objective cannot be to maximize profit. Rather, you must answer this question: what is the minimum needed to achieve all of our objectives? The minimum needed may be much more than your current results or targets. You can only adequately set profit objectives when you know what you will need in order to accomplish your other objectives. Profit is the lifeblood of your business. It is the requirement for survival. It is the cost of staying in business. I prefer to relabel profit as reinvestment capital. Accelerate innovation and growth with stretch targets for management and sales. There are usually 2 forecast numbers created and discussed for collective teams and individual producers in the management of new sales revenue. One is a protected and conservative number, and this is often primarily for the use of the CFO and production leadership. The other is a quota number that is used to manage the team or producers toward acceptable, average, or expected levels of production. This quota number, though, is often the only focus for the producers. It is the number that often defines mediocrity and produces mediocre results. SMART objectives, as you've heard before, are specific, measurable, accountable, realistically challenging, and timed. But we must emphasize the importance of realistically challenging objectives so that targets focus on what is possible, not just probable. This is one of the simplest and most effective ways to get a team out of the morass of mediocrity and onto the road of innovation and improvement, which ultimately fosters greater growth. The danger of quotas. What do your quotas represent today? Do they represent what is excellent in sales achievement or what is the minimal expectation? And what does a focus on quotas do for sales achievement? In my experience, quotas do one thing excellently: foster mediocrity. In other words, quotas help teams to reach the cream of the crop. You have probably heard of sandbagging, but unless you have worked in or around sales and experienced firsthand mediocre management and quota systems, you have no idea how often it happens and how much it limits the potential for growth in a business. Most of your employees, but especially your sales team, have the desire to know that they are safe in their job. In their quest for security, they will quickly trade the potential for the team's optimal growth in exchange for their own personal security. This is why they will do whatever it takes to fight an ever-rising quota or to ensure that next year, quarter, or month is off to a good start with pieces of business that are already in the bag. This is another reason why the power of a greater purpose via an inspiring mission with meaning can be a powerful force in riveting a team's focus on the greater good of their team as opposed to their individual desires. Your job is to consider how you can build the sense of security that your team legitimately has in exchange for getting the most from them. Think about what you can justifiably promise, protect, or deliver to your team that would enhance their sense of security. Obviously, there are times when the fire must be lit underneath them, and jobs may be on the line, but plenty of well-published best practices suggest putting underperformers on a performance plan or getting outplacement for employees ill-suited to the role. The focus here is on getting sales producers and others to focus on the highest potential production, thus implementing the optimal amount of innovation for greatly accelerated growth. To do this, you must facilitate the creation of the third number, a stretch target in almost every area of the company. You do this by asking, what is the highest potential target we might be able to deliver in regard to this objective? This might assume positive outcomes in the economy, suppliers, future innovations, and so on. But if all the stars were to align, what might we be capable of delivering? And give your people the room to safely make these targets without a fear of reprimand if they don't reach them. Identify the critical success factor in every strategic growth objective. One of the most important questions for you to continually ask yourself, for you to ask your team as their manager, and for sales managers to ask sales producers, is the critical success factor, or CSF, question. What is the single most important, measurable activity that, if increased in quantity or quality, will most accelerate progress toward reaching the growth objective? A key word in the question is measurable, as you must note where performance is now and where it needs to be in the future. In a continuously improving environment, you will naturally evolve to a different CSF in time, sometimes within weeks, other times within months or longer. The key to effective and continuous improvement is constantly moving on to the next most important CSF. After setting an objective, ask the owners of that objective what they believe the CSF to be. Follow up by asking when the optimal level of performance in that CSF might be achieved. Then continue to ask, what might the next CSF be after this one is accomplished? And so on. You might have this dialogue both in the planning stage and in your follow-through. These types of CSF-focused conversations are often the heart of any dialogue in consulting, coaching, management, sales management, and even discussions with customers. Spreadsheets with the measures, accountabilities, and timelines, target deadlines, or other related dates can be used in tracking progress in the improved measures, as well as tracking each progressive CSF. The CSF question can also apply to optimizing almost anyone in his or her role effectiveness, and not just with objectives. Ask yourself, what is the single most important measurable activity that I most need to improve in quantity or quality, which, when improved, will most accelerate my progress toward being more effective in my role. The Socratic approach is usually the optimal way to elicit the most buy-in, as well as the higher CSF targets. People tend to not only support that which they help to create, but they also tend to imagine a higher potential in their performance than others may be able to see. In those instances, when you believe an individual is capable of accomplishing more than he is saying, first ask him if it is possible that he could achieve the potential CSF level you are envisioning. You may learn of a constraint that he has in which you were unaware, and you may be able to help coach him or her around that or eliminate it altogether. Then you can again work back through the questioning, and usually without ever telling someone what his goal should be, you can Socratically get him to realize it for himself. This is a common coaching best practice of the majority of turnaround leaders. Set clear growth-focused metrics for each of your growth objectives. Objectives need measures, and the gap between where we are and where we aim to be must be clearly defined in order to optimize progress. Most people hesitate to quantify current or potential performance levels, so it is your role as a growth or turnaround facilitator to quickly get estimates on the current performance measure for every objective you set. During the initial objectives clarification process, most of these measures do not need to be terribly precise. Common sense will tell you when you have an appropriate estimate. More exact measures can be plugged into your objectives later. I mention this because too often planning is painfully prolonged by giving too much attention to needless details and unnecessary levels of accuracy. Once you have established appropriate baselines, move on to challenging your team as to what the appropriate targets should be and how they could measure progress on the most appropriate intervals. The key here is that you must ensure that an objective can be adequately measured throughout the course of time. How will you and the team be able to tell if you're 80% or 120% of where you should be after 6 months? You may need to challenge the metrics to ensure that they are focused on optimal performance levels and growth. You might have to reassure your team that the stretch targets and measures are the most optimistic end of your plan and objectives. People should not live in fear of not reaching stretch targets, but they are where the focus should be. Keep your team's focus on what is possible, not just probable. Set stretch timelines behind each of your growth objectives. Set 2 timelines, one for minimum standards and one for stretch outcomes. Direct your team to accomplish as many of an objective's deliverables as possible in as short a time frame as possible. Even if they are struggling to keep up with the timeline, this stretch effort helps to bring out the constraints that are preventing such performance. You can then begin to work on ameliorating the impact of the constraints and, if necessary, adjust the timelines. To protect your team from burning out and to keep balance in the effort to accelerate delivery upon the objectives and stretch timelines, don't be afraid to adjust the timelines as time goes on. If delivery upon the stretch timelines is falling short, ask those responsible what they think the new stretch target should be. Sometimes the worst that happens is that the original non-stretch timeline is what was hit, but in the process, several constraints were discovered and innovated upon. Improvements were made, and ultimately, productivity was improved by aggressive goal setting and accelerated innovation. Set optimally balanced accountabilities behind each of your growth objectives. Knowledge workers aren't in need of babysitting as much as creative stimulation that encourages innovation and improvement. If you set up innovation pairs, teams, or committees and tie accountabilities to meeting agendas, you'll find it helps to not only keep progress on course, but also to get people to raise the bar and think and create differently than they would alone. We accomplish accountability in our innovation workshops and strategic growth facilitations through quarterly public review of progress and the individual stretch plans each manager has created. Every participant prioritizes the top 3 or so areas of innovation and/or objectives they feel they could make a personal impact upon. Their managers receive a copy of these innovation stretch plans, and progress is also often reported in regular management meetings. Growth objectives from the bottom up. On many occasions, I've had the opportunity to work with a strong visionary leader who has had specific, aggressive objectives that even he or she thought to be a stretch. But after conducting some basic research with that company and its customers, it became apparent to me that I needed to recommend a strategy that would be a bit of a shock to the visionary leader. My advice to that leader and to you is to not give your idea of what the targets should be, but instead first listen to what the individual team members and especially individual sales producers think their target growth objectives should be. The team's target is frequently even higher than the leaders. You will experience several benefits from listening to the individual units and/or sales team producers present their growth objectives before you present your targets. First, if the collective total is greater than your target, you will avoid missing out on what your dictated targets would have accomplished, a lower result. Odds are, a team will hit the target given them. This is a great example of why hitting a goal can be the height of failure. Second, you will learn insights in the process. Your team will share new insights with you as to why things may or may not be realistic. Throughout the process, you can address and rectify misperceptions. You can know where you'll need to adjust resources because you've listened first. Thirdly, people tend to support that which they help to create, so your team is more likely to follow through on plans and targets they were a part of creating as opposed to those that were simply dictated. Time and time again, presidents and managers are shocked at how much higher the individuals on a team will collectively set their own team or individual objectives than if an objective is just dictated to them. This strategy will not only raise the bar of your sales targets, but revenues, productivity, and profits as well. Accelerate growth by turning managers into strategic growth coaches. Your challenge is to get your managers focused on what matters most. You must have a practice for getting these managers out of the tyranny of the urgent, myopic minutia, and into high-impact areas of focus that are too often pushed to the back burner by a lack of urgency. Every manager, by the very definition of his or her title, is responsible for getting workers to become more effective. Whether your managers are excellent sources of best practice wisdom for those reporting to them or not, you can still get your managers to become more effective at managing by beginning the practice of growth coaching sessions. The purpose of these sessions is to have the manager discuss areas such as the growth objectives to which their direct reports are responsible, what the CSF, critical success factor, is for each objective and what measurable activities most need to be improved, innovation areas and progress in them, role-related questions from the roles tools in Chapter 2. The bottom line is, getting managers to coach employees on the strategic growth objectives will improve their management effectiveness and productivity. Prioritizing or defining one central growth objective. I surveyed hundreds of top managers and owners of companies about having a clear central growth objective, or CGO, and these were some of the results. 66% of the companies we surveyed don't have a CGO, but they think they should. Of the companies that had a CGO, only 32% regularly communicated their progress. Of the companies that had a CGO, only 28% had a realistically challenging one. And only 14% of companies are creatively engaging their customer to accelerate their progress toward the CGO. 100% were certain they could exceed their current performance. If all the stars were to align and your team were to implement some significant improvements and innovations, what is the incremental growth you envision your team could experience, and what would be the best measure of that growth? Market share, gross revenues or profits, net profitability, participation in deals for your market, or some other specific objective for your organization. It's amazing the growth we have seen in companies that for 3 generations were more than happy with 10 or 15% growth, sometimes even just 5% annual growth averages. Other companies have smugly said, hey, we're growing at 30, 40, 50% per year. We don't need to improve anything. And yet, when companies of both of these types of growth patterns, very differing growth patterns, have stepped back and gone through an accelerated growth workshop and facilitation process for the purpose of optimizing revenues and profits, their teams innovated significant incremental improvements to the current growth pattern. In that same survey, we found that despite agreement from the respondents that the following were key best practices in accelerating growth, the vast majority of organizations failed to successfully implement any of them. How does your company stack up? Here is a sample central growth objective survey. Do you have a specific central growth objective that is understood by everyone on your team? Is your CGO realistically challenging and believable? Is the CGO exciting, inspiring, emotionally charged, and full of purpose? Does it call your team to action, or is it just another directive? Are your metrics charted, graphed, and visually fed back in shorter, monthly or more frequently, as opposed to longer periods of time, to all of your team? Is an objective third party challenging you and the team to raise the bar, dispelling any skepticism of aggressive growth and ensuring open communication? Is your CGO built not top-down, but by consensus, with a representative set of objective inputs from throughout your team? Is a representation of your customer base invited to give insights on improvement? And are customers' challenges invited through one-on-one open dialogue, ideally with a third party as opposed to strictly quantitative surveying tactics? In 20 years of working with management, sales, marketing, customers to facilitate turnarounds and faster rates of growth, I've seen the identification and clarification of a CGO often be the key leverage point. Even the best of companies with excellent track records consistently make significant improvements when they challenge themselves to raise the bar. It's not magic, but rather a simple process of strategy that isn't often fully implemented. 2 things help to ensure the effectiveness of that effort. First, having a strong internal sponsor or a third party who is thoroughly experienced with the process and is involved in facilitating, coaching, challenging, and holding accountable those who are the stewards of the growth objectives. Second, involving the customer to keep the process customer-centric and focused on increasing the value for the customer. If your strategic plan doesn't come as close to this chapter's 7 key points as you want it to, perhaps you don't have a fully fleshed out and aggressive growth plan. If you are a steward of growth and are unsure whether an adequate CGO, central growth objective, If you are a steward of growth and are unsure whether an adequate central growth objective and process has been implemented, pass out the CGO survey or contact me for a link to an online version. Challenge your leadership to raise the bar and make this the fastest growing time in your company's history, just as so many other companies are experiencing right now.